Peace, folks. Chetna here with Mosaic Eye and the Moon Times, coming to you this month on the topic of decolonizing our minds. A really big topic, and one that I hope to delve into from my own perspective and study. I'd love to dedicate this video to my great-grandmother, Ganga Ma, who was simultaneously confident and caring and stern, and took a lot of pride in her work, even as a housewife, even as a mother and a grandmother. I know her mostly through my own mother, who was raised by her, and I know her energy through the energy that is infused in my mother when I ask her about Ganga Ma. And I feel her through that, through the smile that spreads on my mom's face, through the excitement, through the admiration that she tells stories of her with. So this goes to my ancestor, my great-grandmother, Ganga Ma. I'm also recording this video from Westminster, Colorado, which is a land that is occupied from the Arapaho, the Sioux, the Ute, and the Cheyenne peoples, who stewarded this land and whom this land is also belonging to. So decolonization is a very popular word depending on which circles you find yourself in. It is a popular word, I think, for legitimate reason. To me, decolonization means recognizing the internalized oppression that each of us in our own ways, through our own cultures and histories, that occupy our bodies and our minds and affect how we see ourselves, how we see one another, how we see our history and our culture, and actually releasing the oppressive beliefs that are not serving us or the people and the heritage that we come from. So really, decolonization is a process of radical self-reflection. Self not just being us and who we are in our lives and our bodies in this lifetime, but who we are as comprised of everybody who came before us, which is a lot. Decolonization in this work is a lot, and there's no way I can even pose that I'm an expert. I can share it from my perspective because this is something that I've intentionally thought about for a while now and have been practicing longer than I even knew it was decolonization. This video really has an intention to invite you to continue or further look at your own self, your own history, your own internalized beliefs that are inherently oppressive to you, to your gender, to your worth, to the worth of your people and your culture. Decolonization is not just for people of color or indigenous people. It is for everybody. It is for people who feel that their ancestors were colonized. It is for people who believe their ancestors were colonizers. It is for people who believe our ancestors were both in various ways. So decolonization is for everybody, and that's really important because we are all living together in a deeply colonial world. Now, a lot of this video will be focused on decolonizing our individual minds, on the self-actualization and liberation piece of decolonization. In order to make such a vast, complex topic accessible for this digest, we are focusing on how it is that we can apply this work toward ourselves in our own lives such that we can hit the ground running and practice it starting now. But it is super important to say that the reason why we are doing this work is not only for ourselves and everything that is comprised within ourselves, from our histories of our families to everyone that comes forth from us in our future families. But it also is so that we may show up differently in the world, so that we may show up having recognized and continuing to recognize our privileges, whether it be as a person of color, as a white person, as a person with some degree of class, etc. We all have our own variations of privilege. Acknowledging our privileges from this process of decolonization helps us show up from a position of what we can do, what we can give, especially to those populations that are even more vulnerable to the present day implications, repercussions, trauma of something like colonization, so that we may show up from a place of knowing where we are in this inherent hierarchy of our systems to give forth toward what is a very decolonial framework, that we are in this together, that we are free only when all of us are free. Now feels more important than ever to be talking about this, even in the midst of a global crisis, especially in the midst of a global crisis that is inviting us as a portal to review our systems, to review how we treat one another, to review how we treat women, how we treat the planet, to perhaps step into the other side whenever and however that may come, in a different stance toward ourselves, towards one another, and towards the planet. So decolonization is very much a part of this. There's some very deep spiritual wisdom that is present right now, even in the midst of the trauma associated with this crisis, that the earth is resetting. She is demanding our attention, our spaciousness, our slowness. And so I'm really excited to be exploring this topic of decolonizing specifically our minds in this digest. This is the start of a new season. So this month will be decolonizing our minds. Next month will be decolonizing our bodies. And the third month of the season will be on decolonizing our creativity. They are all inextricably interlinked, and we will just be building upon each month. The best service that I feel like I could be for this video is to share a bit of my exploration around decolonization from my own personal perspective. Decolonization is both highly personal, based on who we are and the people that we come from and the history that we and our people have lived through, yet also it's very interconnecting in that we are all within a system of colonization. We can explore it tangibly and accessibly through our own story, through our own history. For me, as a South Asian, South African American woman, there are complex and overlapping levels of colonization that my family and I have experienced knowingly and unknowingly in our history. And so for me, it's been learning more about the colonial history, even before the British in India, for example, that goes back as far as post-Indus Valley civilization, around the same time as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. It's looking at when patriarchy and the caste system came into play in India. Given that multiple generations of my family lived within apartheid South Africa, it's looking at what internalized racism is so prevalent. It's questioning the tendency among South Asians to be anti-Black, to explore the multiple layers of being in the middle of a hierarchy, neither the most privileged nor the most underprivileged, and understanding all the privileges that came with just being in the middle. It's questioning the Anglophilia that thereby was perpetuated, looking to whiteness as the classy, polite, sophisticated way of being, and looking at Blackness as the wild, dangerous, violent way of being. For me personally, it's been questioning how I have been perpetuating the patriarchy, how as a woman I have silenced myself, I have harmed myself, I have altered myself in consideration of the male gaze. Whether it be for me personally, removing all the hair on my body because I thought it was disgusting, or not speaking because it was not my place, or because I wasn't given permission to speak, silencing myself because I didn't think that my own perspective would be helpful or of value. And I still fall into that at times. It is a very intentional recognition that that pattern is present, and then stepping into a new patterning of, but it is important that I say this, and I do need to say this for myself and for anyone else who might be feeling the same way. Another way that I've seen it manifest in my life significantly, and this is both colonial mentality, I believe, from South Asia as well as South Africa, colonized by the British, is a value of politeness over genuineness. It's polite to engage with people in a certain way. It's polite to give or to not receive, or it's polite to greet someone in a certain way. But really, the genuineness behind it is not in alignment. It's more out of obligation or out of habit or out of social expectation. As I've seen it and as I continue to notice it within me, is a form of colonial mentality. One very tangible example. So if anyone is watching the show Little Fires Everywhere, it's a show about the dynamics between two women, a black woman played by Kerry Washington and a white woman played by Reese Witherspoon. Of course, there are class differences, there are historical and privilege differences, the white woman having a lot more wealth, monetarily, a lot more connections within the community of a primarily white neighborhood, and the black woman being a single mother who is a successful and direct and I don't give a shit artist. They are very, very similar in their parenting styles, in how they, in a way, manipulate others so as to protect themselves or get what they want. When my partner and I were talking about which character are we more able to deal with or be okay with, my automatic conditioned response was to be okay with Reese's character, which was a lot more polite, a lot more sophisticated in her manipulation style, and just generally wearing more of a mask, a colonial mask. Now there's so many dynamics here. There's race, there's class, there's personal expression, and it's complicated. But when I realized they're actually very similar as we talk through it, the glaring thing that was looking back at me was, why do you prefer the polite one over the direct one? So decolonization is looking at these patterns within us. No judgment, right? Like, this isn't our fault. It isn't our individual personal fault. These are internalized values that when we see them for what they are, we can then question, is this actually in alignment with my own values? Is this actually coming from me? The last thing that I want to mention that feels very much alive for me right now in terms of decolonizing my mind is the values of capitalism. That is, money, money, money is what tells you how valuable somebody is. Their status, their position, that's what determines who they are. So the question of, so what do you do, being one of the first questions that one might ask, is, I believe, a form of colonial mentality, because treating that as one of the primary identifiers, as somebody and who they are and what worth they have in their lives, is related to how much money they make, what their reputation and status is in society, in the hierarchy, and preoccupation with that, judgment around that, is very much rooted in capitalism and colonization. For me personally, working as a freelancer, working as an artist, and a healing facilitator, I have to keep coming back to the knowing that the worth of the work is not based on how much money I'm earning. And while money is really important to survive in this culture, in this society, that's not the ultimate indicator of the value of the work. In this day and age, with us being physical distancing, with us having less access to what we normally had access to in terms of distractions or events or things to do and see and visit and go to and be involved with, we are collectively forced to slow down, are forced to eliminate a lot of, to a degree, distractions or doingness to our schedules. As we assess our own purpose, as we assess our own worth and value during this time, it is so important and interesting to question what parts of capitalism and colonization in this regard, in terms of my worth as a human being, as a living person on this planet, is affected by this idea or this deeply held societal and personal belief that I am as worthy as how much money I make, or I am as worthy as how many things I productively do in a day. The process of questioning these things, of reflecting, of recognizing, of taking care of these things, of forgiving ourselves, of finding new ways to be or new ways to think, is the practice of decolonization. And now, in this space that we are in, is such a potent and powerful time to engage with this work. There's one thing that I do want to point out in relation to how we can challenge ourselves and reflect upon ourselves. When we find ourselves drawn to something, whether it's a standard of beauty or it's a standard of class or sophistication or even personality types that might be more polite or more palatable or more accommodating or what have you, it's really important to ask us, why do we like this thing? Why are we drawn to this? Why are we feeling that this is a superior way to be or look or sound or speak? The sentence, "I just like it," is not deep enough. We have to go deeper. Why? What am I drawn to specifically? Where might this have come from? Why is it that I like this? Why is it that I don't like that? How does it relate to the male gaze or the white gaze or the gaze of authority? Who is authority? Why are they authority? How do they get to be authority? How am I authority? Asking these questions is so much part of the process. Also, there are so many layered ways in which we can apply this practice of decolonization to. And it can be really overwhelming. There might be work to be done in terms of decolonizing our beauty, our minds, our bodies, our creativity, etc. But choose a couple to focus on, to notice, to question, to challenge a little at a time. Focus on specific things that come up a lot in our lives. This is a lifelong process. We are talking about decolonizing centuries of our history in our blood and our bones, in our society systemically, between us across a really long period of time, far beyond the duration of one lifetime. And so we have to hold patience and slowness with this. The piece of art on symptoms of colonization that is shared in this digest may be a potentially good visual to look into and to reflect upon. Which elements do you feel some emotion with? Do you feel is very true for you or is very not true for you? Both could be giving you some feedback as to which aspects of your colonial mentality might be present based on your own reaction to either of those. That in no way is an exhaustive list of symptoms of colonization. They are vast and complex and personal, but by you engaging with it, reflecting on what brings something out in you is really a great way to continue expanding your awareness of how colonial mentality might be manifesting in your life. I hope that this is helpful. This is only a little sliver of the pie of what it means to practice decolonization, to practice resurging the wisdom of your people, of your history, of your culture. There are other resources included in this digest that will be helpful for hearing other voices in relation to this work. And stay tuned with the following digests as we continue to build upon this in relation to our beautiful, wise bodies and also our inherent, powerful creativity. Much love, y'all. Take care. Now, a lot of this video will be focused on decolonizing our individual minds, on the self-actualization and liberation piece of decolonization. In order to make such a vast, complex topic accessible for this digest, we are focusing on how it is that we can apply this work toward ourselves in our own lives such that we can hit the ground running and practice it starting now. But it is super important to say that the reason why we are doing this work is not only for ourselves and everything that is comprised within ourselves, from our histories of our families to everyone that comes forth from us in our future families, but it also is so that we may show up differently in the world, so that we may show up having recognized and continuing to recognize our privileges, whether it be as a person of color, as a white person, as a person with some degree of class, etc. We all have our own variations of privilege. Acknowledging our privileges from this process of decolonization helps us show up from a position of what we can do, what we can give, especially to those populations that are even more vulnerable to the present day implications, repercussions, trauma of something like colonization, so that we may show up with what we have, what we do have, from a place of knowing where we are in this inherent hierarchy of our systems to give forth toward what is a very decolonial framework, that we are in this together, that we are free only when all of us are free.